RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOpsAF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hey, RevOpsAF listeners, if your goal is consistent execution across your revenue engine, this one's for you. You know the gap that lives between strategy and what actually happens in deals? Playbooks that ever get used, process docs collecting dust, and CRM fields that only get filled when someone's behind a quarterly number? What if you could close that gap? That's where Accord comes in. Accord is the revenue excellence platform that turns your best practices like MedPick, mutual action plans, value selling, and account planning into unavoidable embedded playbooks your sellers work in every single day. Rather than static playbooks and training PowerPoints that live in a folder, Accord makes playbooks the workspace where deals get done. Integrated with your CRM, shared with buyers, and scored so you get real visibility into what's being done and how well. Teams using Accord see faster deal cycles, higher win rates, and more predictable forecasting because doing the right activities becomes unavoidable. Whether you're in RevOps, sales ops, enablement, or go-to-market leadership, if execution excellence is your North Star, check out Accord at inaccord.com and start making excellence the only option for your team.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the RevOpsAF podcast. I'm your co-host, Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a community of 18,000 plus revenue operators from all across the globe. And on the RevOpsAF podcast, we talk to people who are RevOpsAF about things that are RevOpsAF. And today we are sitting down with Ross Rich, who is the CEO and co-founder over at Accord. And the topic of the day is all about solving for the middle 60%, or really looking at this movable middle. And we'll get into a little bit more on specifically what we mean there to drive some better revenue outcomes. But before we do that, Ross, why don't you, just introduce yourself a little bit, tell us more about yourself, your background, what kind of prompted you to start Accord, and then, give us a little bit more on this movable middle, the solving for the 60%, what that really means.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. And I love the definition overview of RevOpsAF for people that are, let's just say, passionate about the RevOps community. And a bit about myself. So I started the company just over 5 years ago. Spent the first part of my career in enterprise sales as first a rep and then a leader. And basically came up with the concept of Accord from working with our RevOps team and enablement team and CRO on a lot of kind of processes to share best practices and up-level the team, and found that maybe changing fields in Salesforce and stage names didn't necessarily drive the outcomes that I would imagine are possible when it comes to playbooks and processes. So I went out there to build something that was much more field-friendly for sellers to have better outcomes with customers, and that's what we've been doing at Accord.
Yeah, I love it. And I feel like founders that go out and attack or solve problems that they've experienced firsthand are the ones who end up building the best products and the best solutions, because who doesn't want to go out and solve their own problems?
It's definitely a lot easier when you live the thing for 10 years, day in and day out, like having to know the details of like, 100%. How does it feel? And what are those in between conversations? And how does that person work with the 10 other functions? I couldn't imagine having to start something from scratch like some other folks do. But it's definitely the easier path.
Yeah. And so again, what we're talking about today is on solving for the middle 60%, or this movable middle. And I think first thing I want to get into is the why now sort of part of this. And I think it's driven by two things, but I want you to add more to this perspective. So if we think about pre-AI and pre whatever era we're in now, right? Like you always had this thing where we had like the top 20% of whether it was reps or people at our company who were like really good at their job, right? They were going to do well no matter what. Like they just figure it out. And then you had the bottom 20%. And those were like the people that you had to spend a lot of time and energy on, like tracking what they were doing, how well they were doing. But I'll state the obvious, like you add up the top 20 plus the bottom 20, that equals 40%. 100% means you're missing out on 60% of people things. And then you couple that with the fact that now we're in this AI world where it can make you so much more effective and efficient that I think, I don't know, is there convergence, right? There's this middle section. I don't know if it's becoming bigger or maybe more condensed, but talk to me a little bit about what this middle 60% problem actually is and then how efficiency plays into all this.
Yeah, there's always been this, I think, breakdown from a rep performance perspective that was just the truth for any team, whether it's a 5-10 person team or a 500 person team, that there's a small group, 20% is probably overly generous, maybe 10% of the team that drives 70-80% of the revenue. There's a minority at the very bottom that drives almost nothing, that does take a lot of the performance management time and leadership time to work with. And then there's the majority of people that make up the rest of the revenue. Maybe it's at 30% of the revenue. And I think what you're seeing right now is with this push for AI that can solve a lot of simple people-based things, that group either needs to go up to the top, they either need to get much better and be part of that elite top, or are going to get bunched into the bottom because of how much AI can solve for, making those top reps even more effective. Maybe you don't need as many sellers if your top 20% of sellers can now maybe handle 150% of what they could handle. When before they were at 100%, they could work 2 or 3 really big deals a year if they're enterprise, or maybe they could do 5 or 7 medium-sized deals. Maybe they can do 9 or 10 of those now. And I'm seeing this push for kind of the hardcore nature and accountability nature of managing teams these days, where the bar for rep productivity and AR per head is through the roof with a lot of these new companies that are growing insanely fast and super productively. That's really changing the game and the benchmarks for the entire market. And I think that's why a lot of people are focused on how do we either improve or figure out this from a cost perspective, the most expensive underlying cost of your whole business, which is typically your AE's headcount costs.
Yeah. And what's interesting to think about what you mentioned is around this notion of efficiency and productivity is if you think about things like quotas and the amount of kind of dollars that we typically expect our sales team to produce, those don't necessarily go up a whole lot year over year. And if you typically do increase quotas, there's a big uproar. People typically don't like that.
There's a market for it, right? You contribute a certain amount of revenue, you get paid a certain amount. So you only have so much to play with. They can go somewhere else and generate a similar amount and get paid a similar amount. So yeah, you don't have that much wiggle room there.
Yeah. But the flip side of that is obviously like you have inflation, costs continue to go up. You mentioned headcount, and the dollars you're spending on your sales team is typically one of the biggest line items that any company will have on your P&L. And so if you look at things like revenue per employee, like those has definitely been declining over the last how many years. But now in this AI world that we're talking about, we're looking at how can we actually flip that, right? How can we change that, especially given what you mentioned with some of these new companies that are out there and just producing these absolutely insane efficiency metrics, like what's possible. And so it's like, how do you end up doing that? And I think there's some traps that we can fall into as well. And I know like we're going to talk on like buying destination tools and what that kind of means. So if we think about, we got into the why now, why this is important for people to be considering. Tell us about some of the traps or maybe the pitfalls that are easy for people to fall into. What are those initial reactions on, oh, like I just got to go out and do this, right, to solve for that problem? Oh, I just got to go out and figure out what my top 20% of reps are doing, and then I just got to make sure that everybody else does that, right? Like it's as simple as that, isn't it? I'm guessing the answer is probably no, but why don't you tell me?
Yeah, if it was just that simple. I think you already mentioned one of the traps, which is you end up spending a ton of your time with the lowest performers because you think, oh, okay, that's the biggest lever I have. The people that are barely contributing, if they just contribute a bit more. But the unfortunate reality is that's typically the time suck. They're typically the people that don't either have the skill or honestly, most of the time, I think generally people are pretty smart. They don't have the will to maybe learn the way that you do things or the industry that you're in or any of those types of pieces that would make them successful. So that's kind of the first trap, I think, is spending your time with the lowest performers. I think you need a way to make it fair. And typically it's not fair for them, right? If they're in a place where they're not going to be successful with the skills that they have or the effort that they're willing to put in, there's a ton of places to work out there where that's going to be a fit for everyone. I think that's the most fair piece and the biggest trap from a leadership perspective. And I would say that the second is spending a lot of time with your top performers to make them even more successful. Like typically they figured out a way to work. Typically your top performers want a ton of autonomy. And I would say it's how do you figure out what they're doing and spending a ton of time with that middle, with that 60% on, hey, this is what Stephanie and Jason that have been at 170% every quarter for the last 5 years they've been here. This is what they're doing to be successful. How do I make it easy for you guys to do that? That to me is the winning formula. How do you make sure that you're saying, hey, how do I energize the top performers to invest their time in helping us understand what makes them great? And how do we hold the rest of the team to that standard in a really fair and objective way? How do we make it easy for them to do those things? So not just bug them about it, not just to have them fill out fields for them to do it. How do we get them to really understand deeply what they're doing with customers on the field and building that into their workflow? I would say a lot of tools and investments out there that I've even been a part of become about internal inspection and homework of showing and saying that we did those things and actually doing them with the client. For example, everyone knows the kind of CMS and LMS tools out there. It's like, here's our competencies, here's our skills, here's all the frameworks, here's all the playbooks. Going to those things and studying those things is different than going and doing the things with the customer. And I think that's another really big disconnect in the market is just because you have the concepts of them and the frameworks available to the reps doesn't mean that you're helping them do those things with your customers, which is where the real impact is.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I guess two things when it comes to the traps that we talked about. So one, you mentioned thinking that you should go, I'll say straight to the bottom, focus on the bottom 20%. You're ignoring the middle 60, which is what we're going to ultimately talk about here in a little bit in terms of the solution. The other aspect is destination tools. So doing stuff that takes your reps out of their workflows is nothing that can really help a whole lot. And then the last thing you mentioned is really you need enforcement, right? If you don't have something that is enforceable or say unavoidable, then it's optional. And if it's optional, it most likely means that it's not going to get done.
Yeah, right? One of my favorite quotes is culture's defined by the behaviors that you put up with, right? It's not necessarily defined by what your top people are doing. It's typically defined by what leadership is willing to put up with.
Yep.
And if there's people that, are going to conversations with customers, asking the same questions again, if there's activities that you see that are just below your standard, if you're willing to put up with that, that's not an inspiring culture to be around, right? It's typically defined by actually the bottom and the things you're willing to put up with, not necessarily the top. And that really resonates when I think about teams that I've been on and been inspired by is the mutual accountability, right? Hey, this is the level that we want to rise to, whether it's a sports team or a sales team or in business. That to me is like really inspirational leadership and the people willing to do the hard things and have the hard conversations. So that's what I think about when I think about that, the middle group that you want to inspire. How do you help them do their job, but how do you inspire them to say, this isn't the bar here. This is how we engage with customers. This is how we show up. That's how I've also gotten better as a seller or leader in my career.
Yeah. Let's talk more about the solution aspect of this then. So if, again, some of those things that we just hit on are the traps that people can fall into, maybe continue that thread that you were just on. How do you ultimately solve for this problem? How do you make that middle 60 more efficient, more productive? What do you do?
Yeah, I think it's a lot more simple. It doesn't mean it's easy. Simple is just, it's less complex than people think. I think it's around, we have a group, typically we're talking about a company at a decent scale. We're not talking about seed stage companies. A company at a decent scale that has reps that are being successful. They figured out how to engage with customers, to find the right accounts, to help them understand their solution, to help them prove out value and onboard successfully and renew and expand, right? Let's go and talk to the people that are doing that consistently. Typically, they're like myself back in the day, they're very unconsciously competent. They might be doing these things. They don't necessarily have this crazy detailed process that they're following, but they figured out what to say to who and how to run an amazing process. I think as a leadership team, especially in RevOps, if you're responsible for operationalizing these best practices and standardizing them as you grow your company, you really need to deeply dissect that. And again, build a workflow that makes it not optional to do those things. Hey, we know that, for example, if there's maybe mid-market deals where we have less than 3 stakeholders, our win rate drops by 80%. Or in the enterprise segment, if we don't get to a C-suite stakeholder by stage 3, we have a 30% lower ACV. Understanding what those people are doing consistently to win those deals at high order sizes and velocity, and making that required for our team. And I think it's their job to make it easy for the rest of the team to do those things that, again, you're never going to have a group of people that are just organically doing all that stuff by themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously focus on what your top performers are doing. I don't want to say like skip or ignore, but that's what we're saying is like, instead of going and trying to apply what the top 20% are doing to what the bottom 20% should do, it's taking those and making them enforceable for the middle 60. And I like the way that you frame things of, it's not about training. It's really about how do you make this the path of least resistance? Because ultimately, I mean, we were in a webinar together earlier today where we talked about things that can feel like homework, right? Which are really where it feels like homework when you don't see the value in doing it. And so if you can really get across why these things are valuable to do, then it doesn't feel like homework. It just feels like a path to success, right? It doesn't feel like training. I'm sure we've all sat through like corporate trainings before and you're just like, oh my God, what am I doing here? That's when you've lost, right? You want people to feel like the effort that they're putting in are going to just deliver outcomes that ultimately make them successful, right?
Yeah. I think back to any sales role I had when we were doing the in the room with the team trainings and mock negotiations. Never are as visceral and emotional and memorable as when you're doing it with a customer and you have your paycheck on the line, because at least 50% of your take home is related to commission. So building things into their process and how they're working with customers, I find, is much more impactful than any time you can spend in that classroom. Not that those things aren't helpful at all. I just think if you were to look at where to spend your calories internally, I would recommend it being focused on doing the right stuff on the real accounts and opportunities that your team's working, versus in some theoretical classroom talking about Zopas and Cialdini's 7 influences, whatever. It's this is what we need to do. This segment, this geo, this product, these are the personas we need to engage. This is why. That's the stuff that I think you're going to get much more out of an engagement from your team on.
Yeah. And all right, so we hit on like why this stuff is important now, some of the traps that you can fall into, ultimately what the solution is. But I want to get into some tactical kind of takeaways or things that revenue operators can do to kind of start to go out and view things in a new light, approach solving for the middle 60%. What are some of those specific things, pieces of advice, places that people can start that you would have for operators that they can go out and start to do, implement, deploy today, as soon as they're done listening to this episode?
Yeah, I would be shocked if there was not more time you could be spending with those top performing managers, directors, and sellers to really understand what wins at your company and helping replicate that. I think there's a lot of time spent behind closed doors looking at data and kind of creating processes and flows and things in theory that sound really smart and make a lot of sense, that when rubber meets the road, might not jive with that, and you already have the winning formula probably from a lot of folks at your team and at your company. So I'd say starting there, can you spend 5-10% more of your week with those top folks and understand those behaviors, so that when you're thinking about process and tooling and tech and in your day-to-day, how do you embed that? I would also say getting the respect and trust from your team is really important, because when you ask them to do different things, do they think that you actually talk the talk, or are you someone coming in and just thinks that it's about inspection and the forecast versus, again, how they make their money? So that's probably number one, I would say. I'd say number two, I think there's such a focus on, which is not a bad thing, tech consolidation, but when you look at the dollars and cents, 90% of it is going to be in your headcount, and a fraction of that is going to be in your tooling. I think it's an easy thing to default to, because there might be a lot of shelfware and there might be a lot of investments that you've made that you probably shouldn't have, and that you're going to not look great in front of the CFO because you asked for 100K or 50K for this thing that didn't really result in anything. But far more than that is the reps that aren't ramping, or the folks that were on a PIP for 6 months or 9 months and spent all of your manager's time is super expensive. Those are the areas where there's much higher ROI to spend. And that's why, again, we're talking about this middle 60%, because that's where by far your money is going as an investment from a revenue organization, even company level. And I think that's where you have the biggest lever on to impact your P&L and your revenue growth.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's in the numbers, right? Like even if you just look at the fact that it is a lot of time that gets spent on managing poor performers, assuming you have the 10 to 20% of your team that are those poor performers, what you're ultimately ignoring is that middle 60%. And again, it's like
the opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not just that they're expensive and that makes up way more than your tech spend and all the consolidation work that you could do. It's that you're investing all your people time and energy on them versus how do we up-level the people that do have the skill and the will and just need you to help them be more successful.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And it's right there in the numbers, right? 60% is greater than 20%. If you got 10 people and you can actually do some things to move the needle for 6 of them versus spending all your time trying to do something for 2 of them, what makes more sense to you, right? I think I'd rather try to get 6 people to do a better job.
Yeah. And the other piece too is not just the headcount cost, right? If an average enterprise rep is around $250K, something like that, and the average commercial rep maybe around 150, obviously that's much more than your annual spend in trying to save 10 or 20% on some technology. I would also say the opportunity cost actually of other people getting these opportunities and accounts that just are never going to close. And that's like kind of these like hidden costs that I think are really hard to quantify. So again, going back to the model of your top performers closing exponentially more, and then most of the deals go into the middle, you have such more of an impact if you can make sure that you're setting those standards for how all those deals and accounts are being executed and they're going to people that can make the most of those deals. You probably have a lot of opportunities that you thought maybe you never had a shot at, but they're just going to the wrong people, and really raising the bar for what our standards are of how we execute deals and opportunities. I think will really have, again, these hidden benefits and ROI that we're just not seeing because we're putting up with a lot of things that we feel like are just kind of part of having a sales team. Every deal didn't have a killer business case. We only talked to a couple stakeholders at this account. What if that wasn't true? What if on every deal we did talk to 5 people and maybe 1 or 2 of those changed companies and they came back because they heard a great pitch from us because we actually reached out to them instead of the 1 or 2 people that we usually contact.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. All right. I have one more question for you. It's RevOps related, not necessarily related to this middle 60 kind of percent topic that we were having. So obviously within the Accord platform, which does a lot of great things around account planning, you have tons of AI capabilities built in. But I want to know, outside of Accord, what is one AI product, AI piece of technology, AI feature, and some other tool that relates to revenue or revenue operations that you're getting tons of value from, that you love to use, that is incredible, or that you've seen your sales team or your CS team or other people within your company kind of use and get value from?
Yeah, in the personal world, using ChatGPT or Gemini every day is just a huge unlock, and it's just a lot of fun, curiosity. You see something, you're like, I wonder how that works, and you can get to that answer, I think, a lot better than typical Google search. So just the nerd in me loves to figure out how things work. In the business side, I would say the step change from, obviously everyone's familiar with like conversational intelligence from the last 5 or 6 years of call recording and I think some of the basic functionality there. I think being able to use those transcripts to turn into assets in a structured way has been a huge unlock. For example, in our own product, and this is extensible to a lot of others, how do we take dozens of conversations and thousands of hours that there's no way we could actually listen to? That was the initial value prop, right? Listening to these calls and coaching and the summary. How do you take that and turn that into an executive summary or into a point of view around how to engage with a customer, an account, or something like that? I found that like to be mind-blowing and how accurate it can be of taking so much unstructured data and turning that into something that's usable, that kind of blows the mind of your customer to show them how much you understand them. So that's been like a really cool use case that we've been leaning into.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I've done that in a few cases as well. And I've had some like either customers or prospects come back and be like, wow, this was like so thoughtful. Thank you so much. And I'm like I put it together, but obviously it was like with the help of AI, but I'm not going to tell you that. I appreciate that you thought I put all that work into it.
Like there's no way to pull, what did they say at this point? And who was the person's name? And what was that percentage? Like it's so good at taking such a broad swath of information and turning it into something that is summarized and specific. So obviously I think the editing of it is really important. I don't think it's just, okay, auto-generate this and send. Sometimes it sounds crazy and makes up some shit. I was like to one of my reps, I was like, where did this 33% thing come from? And they're like, oh, they mentioned on the call. I like look it up. I'm like, no, they just made up. I just made up this stat. All good. Let's delete it and change it around. So I think you got to be really careful with that. But overall, I think it leads to better outcomes if you use it responsibly.
Yeah. And then I was going to ask, chat, what's your AI, I guess your AI of choice? ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude?
So at Accord, as a business, we're built on Gemini. Personally, I was just an early adopter with ChatGPT, and I'm like, I've heard the Gemini consumer model is gotten even better lately, and I don't know, it's the classic thing of changing your habit, right? I'm like, I'll just default to that in the app and whatnot, but that's what I've been using. How about yourself?
Yeah, same. I'm ChatGPT. I think it's old habits die hard, and even like trying some of the other ones, it looks different. Things are in different spots, and so I have it on my list to try some of the other ones, but I would say we're in the same boat.
That's crazy how that works. Yeah.
Ross, this was great, my friend. Thank you very much for dropping some knowledge on us and sitting down with us today. So again, y'all can find Ross on LinkedIn. You can learn more about Accord at inaccord.com. And then Ross and his team are also throughout the RevOps Co-op community. So if you ever want to chat more on anything AI, account planning, anything like that, you can find him there as well. But Ross, thank you very much, my friend. I really appreciate you dropping some knowledge on us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep it RevOpsAF, y'all.